After 4 long years of high school, it's officially time for my senior project. So, over the course of the next 56 days, my goal is to make a film under 20 minutes long of a sculpture. I've never made a full film before or a sculpture, so this might be a really bad idea, but there's only one way to find out. And the very first step in this entire process is just to find some inspiration. The first place I wanted to look for some inspiration was my middle school binder because I used to doodle a lot, but I quickly realized that there's just not a lot of inspiring things in here. So instead, I decided to focus on some of my old drawings, specifically a lot of the colors and shapes that I used to use that I really wanted to utilize in the sculpture. So after collecting some ideas, I just went straight into sketching it. And I started off with this weird worm thing. I'm not really sure what it was supposed to be, but I quickly erased it and just started all over. So then I started making this dinosaur looking thing, but no matter how much I added to it, there was just something missing about it. So I erased it again and finally settled on this thing. I'm not sure what it is, but I thought that the colors looked nice. Now it's time to make a model of the skeleton, and lucky for me, my family drinks enough Fresca to water every dead blade of grass by the highway, so that meant I pretty much had enough cardboard to make anything I wanted. The only problem was that I had no idea what I was doing. I just hoped that somewhere along the way I would figure it out, and after a bunch of messing around, I ended up with this, which was kind of what I was going for. Moving on, the next step was to make a blueprint. So I started off by just taping all these pieces of paper together that I could flip over to draw a life-size drawing that I could use to figure out how much wood I needed and how to cut everything out and just to have a good idea of how big this thing was actually going to be. Now, the shop is really dirty, so the first thing I needed to do is sweep it clean. And I was originally going to just sweep everything behind the workbench, but then I remembered my parents are probably going to watch this video. Alright, so first things first, I need to trace everything out with a Sharpie, starting with the spine. The legs are going to be this long. And then I trace out the legs, which are definitely not going to be that long. And then the base, which is just a circle with two dents in it for the legs. After that, I can finally start cutting everything out using a jigsaw, which I had never used before. I thought it would be really easy, but there was actually a pretty big learning curve to it. At first, the blade kept getting stuck, which was really annoying, but eventually I did get the hang of it and I managed to cut everything out without losing a finger, which is actually pretty impressive for me. And then it was time to put everything together. I had the brilliant idea where I thought that I could just balance everything together while it dried.
I think that's gonna work. Actually worked. Pretty sturdy.
So I had to start all over, and this time I decided to be responsible and actually use a nail gun to set everything in place, which actually, not surprisingly, worked really well. I managed to get all the body pieces together, and then it was time for the legs. I eyeballed the length of all these pieces and they came out exactly the same. So now all I have to do is just nail them together and then nail them to the baseboard. And now, after getting the legs in place, I can finally start to see it starting to come together. Then I had the useless idea to glue these little half circles in place that didn't actually do anything. And now it was time to worry about the head. I didn't want to go with my original idea because it was weird. Not that this is any better, but I had this idea in my head to make it really droopy for some reason. So I started sketching out a few ideas, but they were more or less the same, except for the third one. That one was just a little bit quirky. Christmas break was officially here, and that meant that it was finally time to grind. and I started off by just cutting out the outline of the body and the head. At this point, I was getting significantly better at using the jigsaw. My cuts were coming out smoother and cleaner, and it was significantly less painful to make them. And now for the fun part, I'm going to fill in all the gaps and crevices with some cardboard and hot glue. To use the hot glue gun, all I have to do is unplug the heater, which is fine because hypothermia builds character, and it's never truly time to grind without it. What I love about hot glue is that it's super quick and easy, and there's no panicking or stress. And the specific hot glue that I use for this project is actually made for wood, so it all stuck really well. For the head, I just cut out a circle and divided it in half and stuck it on both sides of the platform. After all that, I'm using chicken wire to bulk out the piece and prepare it for the next step. This garbage is now going to be perfect stuffing for the sculpture. All I have to do is shove all of it down the tiny little openings in the chicken wire. The camera stopped recording when I put foam on the first side, but I quickly learned that I was going to need a lot more foam and a lot more garbage because this stuff does not go very far. One can covers about one side, and you have to shake each can for an entire minute, which might not sound like very long, but my arms were aching. After a long Christmas break, I came back to find out that the foam had pretty much solidified this thing to the workbench, so I had to struggle and shove and push just to get this thing off. But once I did, I was left with a giant foam marshmallow that I could start carving and shaping. And then I sanded it, which made everything super buttery smooth and satisfying. Now, I wanted this guy to have a beer belly, so I marked out certain areas in the foam that I wanted to carve out and bulk up so that I could make certain areas stand out more than others. And after sanding all that down, I marked again where I was going to go through and add more foam later on. Now the moment I've been waiting for this entire time, which was building out the head. And I started off by sculpting the bottom jaw, the top jaw, and then adding these little circles to mark where I wanted the eyes to be. And then I glued his brow bones in place. And this was the point in the project where I started to realize it looked like a really, really ugly frog. So I came up with a plan, and that was to make him have a ginormous head, like he had a giant brain and it was about to come out of his skull. After manipulating the wire to the basic shape I wanted, I glued everything in place and started cutting out the feet. This was the last step I needed to do before I could add foam again to the body. Now I only had one can of foam left, so I had to be really strategic about what I used it for and where I placed it. And I decided to not go over the skull with foam because I wanted to save it for the stomach and the legs, which ended up being a really horrible idea. There was only 4 days left to finish the project, and I had a lot to do today. I started off by just carving all the foam that I put in the day before and sanding it all down, making it nice and smooth, and preparing it for the next step, which was going to be the paper mache. And here's some fun ASMR footage of me carving little toes and feet. Lucky for me, the foam didn't disintegrate in water, which meant that I could continue with the process of paper mache. I started off using this really old wood glue that I found, which was super lumpy. So I added water to it, dumped it all out, and then stirred it with a paper towel roll because I didn't really want to wash a spatula. After painstakingly cutting out all the sheets of paper, I could finally start on the process of covering everything in a 10-foot radius in a thick layer of glue, including the sculpture, but that probably was the least affected. I picked up some modeling magic from the craft store, and while I was working with it, I started thinking about what names this company could use that would be more suiting for their product. I was thinking something like lumpy magic or modeling misery, because unless you consider pain and suffering to be magical, then the name could be really misleading. I really thought this stuff was going to be perfect because it's supposed to dry lightweight and easy to sculpt and stick to pretty much every surface, but that's just really not true. It was really hard to get it to stick to literally anything, including itself. I've worked with a lot of clay before, and the main difference with this stuff is that you can poke at it and manipulate it all day long, but it will still be lumpy. Water doesn't do anything, and then once it's dry, you can't sand it. So you're pretty much just stuck with whatever shape it decides to fall into. But nonetheless, I decided to try and make the best with what I got. And my best bet at this point was just to try and go with it. Embrace the lumpiness, make it look intentional. So that's really what I was going for here. And you know what? That's okay because at the end of the day, we're all a little lumpy in some places. And, and this also happened to be the point in the project where it started to look kind of scary. And that's not what I was originally going for, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't starting to grow on me. After finishing both eyes and adding some wrinkles here and there, I decided to just grab a giant clump of clay and just stick it on the back of his head. Because, like I said, I didn't add any foam there, so I thought that just adding some clay would fix everything and make it better, but it did something. I'm not sure if it's what I wanted. Then I just added some clay to his stomach, his legs, his knees, pretty much everywhere that was exposed. And then I finished everything off by sculpting his little foot before going to the other side and doing it all over again. I'm not really sure why, but the second foot just came out so much chunkier than the first one. I mean, this guy's got some really lopsided toes. I had 2 days to finish the project, which meant that today I had to start priming no matter what. So I just sanded everything, added some wood filler and spackle, and then finally, after a few hours, I could start painting. And oh my goodness, just adding the white base coat made everything feel so uniform and ready for paint, and I started to get so excited. Early the next morning, I woke up and got ready for a long day of painting because there was a lot to do and it all had to get done by tonight. I started off with the inside of his mouth because that was by far going to be the most difficult area to paint, and I wanted to get it out of the way so I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Now, I would probably call myself a lot of things, but a painter is not one of them. Every single second of painting for me is like torture because I'm just a back and forth kind of person and I hate drying time. It bothers me so much, but I suffered through it because I needed to and it actually did start coming together shockingly. And this was honestly probably the best paint job I had ever done. After I finished the mouth, I went straight to the head and the eyes. And basically, I didn't really know what I was doing at this point. I just kept adding layers and layers until I started to get happy with it. And it was right around this point that I started to realize that I thought it looked really cool. Then I added a blue nose because I needed to use the color blue because I bought it for this project, so it had to go on. And then I tried accentuating all those little lumps and bumps that I talked about before to make them look intentional, which I actually loved. I think it really made all of it look perfect and uniform. Like I was trying to do that, and that was probably the best choice I made in this entire project. I mean, the entire time I was working on it, it was just a lot of suffering, and I was just scared that it wasn't going to come together, but it really started to with the paint job, and that was really what it needed the entire time was paint. And now that I was adding it, I saw it slowly all come together, and it was just making me so happy. I added little freckles just to make it a little bit cute. And then I mixed up this color, which I thought was really, really pretty, and it would be perfect for his body. And right about this point, I started to think that it kind of looked like the same colors you would see on a parrot or a bird, which I loved. I loved like the whole bird thing going on because it was some weird, creepy bird with lips and teeth and no wings and weird little stubby legs. And after blending and blending and blending, I finally started on the legs. And those were kind of hard because there was a lot of guidelines I had to follow and clean everything up over and over again. And then I just added definition to the stomach, the knees, and then the very, very last step was to paint the toenails. I really had to learn to trust the process during this entire project. I was so scared that it was not going to come together or that I wasn't even going to be able to finish it. But I kept going, and I'm so glad that I did because now that it's over, it's horrifying, scary, it's terrifying to look at, and I don't hate it at all. I actually really like it, and I'm so impressed that I actually managed to put this much time and effort into one single project. And even though there was a lot of pain and suffering that went into it, looking back now, I realized that I actually had a lot of fun and I learned so much. And if I had the chance, I would definitely do it again.